This one is going to be fun because it's my main army and there has been quite a lot of good and, to be honest, not so good changes for them throughout 10th edition so far, but I do still absolutely love them. And so let's jump right in and get started with our full Dark Angels Codex review. As you'll have come to expect, we will be taking a look at the main detachment rules, the enhancements, the stratagems, and all of the datasheets, and go through them one by one to point out what is good, what is bad, and what kind of tricks the Unforgiven can get up to with their unique units. Starting off, of course, is the army rule for the faction, which is the familiar Oath of Moment that all Marines get. This allows you to choose an enemy unit in your command phase, and you get re-roll hit rolls against them until your next command phase when you can choose a different target. There is the new added bonus to this that you get +1 to wound, but to get that you can't have any chapter specific units, so if you are bringing anything Space Wolf or Blood Angel or Dark Angel keyworded, you won't get it. So obviously, this being a Dark Angel Codex review video, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say if you are running anything in this list, you're probably running a Dark Angels list and you are going to be taking some of these keyworded units, so you're probably not going to get that +1 to wound buff. But still, it is a very good army rule and it does bring a significant boost to your output against a key enemy unit every single battle round. And then for the Dark Angels specifically, we got 3 detachments with their codex, and the 4th one, the new Lion's Blade Task Force with the Grotmus detachments. But before we get into those, there are also a few Dark Angel specific army rules that we do need to touch on as well. The Dark Angels get a few bespoke rules for their 1st and 2nd companies, the Deathwing and the Ravenwing, and they're not super huge, but they are quite impactful. So the Ravenwing rule means that all mounted and vehicle units with the fly keyword gain the Ravenwing keyword, whilst the Deathwing rule means that any Terminators, Blade Guard, Stern Guard, Vanguard, along with any Land Raiders, Repulsors or Dreadnought models, they all gain the Deathwing keyword. And this is important for some things like your detachment rules, as well as enhancements as stratagems, as we go through their specific detachments. So first up is the Index detachment of the Unforgiven Task Force. This one was a little bit underwhelming when it initially came out, and although it has had some improvements since then, it's still not the most amazing set of rules if you are running Dark Angels. The rule of Grim Resolve grants your units that are battle shocked the ability to count their OC as 1 rather than 0, so you can still control, hold and take objectives even if you are battle shocked. So that can be quite handy compared to other armies that won't get that, and when they are battle shocked they pretty much can't do anything objective wise. The problem with it is that Battle Shock is still a rather underwhelming mechanic in 10th edition, so this doesn't make for a super amazing bonus quite a lot of the time. You do now get an additional buff in this detachment in that in each of your command phases you can pick a unit from your army and it gains +1 to the OC of its models for that battle round, so that can actually be quite good. It doesn't rely on you being battle shocked or anything, it can just make things a little bit easier for your smaller units like your bikes and Terminators to just go in and steal an objective from an opponent, even if they are going up against a much larger enemy unit. So it's not amazing, but it does definitely have some niche use, and if you are playing and focusing on the objective game, it can come in handy. Obviously the detachments all come with their set of enhancements, and the Unforgiven Task Force is no different. It actually has 4 fairly decent ones. The issue with them all is that they get better based on you being battle shocked. So again, it's relying on that mechanic that isn't really very reliable, so it can be hard to get the most out of them. The Shroud of Heroes is the first one. This allows you to get back up after the bearer has been destroyed on a 2+, which is nice and helpful. It is fairly pricey at 25 points, but being able to get back up and keep on fighting is a really nice tool to have. Now you come back with 3 wounds left, but if you are battle shocked when you were destroyed, you come back with full wounds. So this could in theory get you back a fairly scary 6 wound Terminator Captain or something similar, in which case it is a rather good enhancement. But of course, being battle shocked isn't something you can rely on, so you can't really expect to be coming back with full wounds, and most of the time, you will probably just be coming back with the 3. Stubborn Tenacity is a cheaper 15 points. This gives the bearer and his unit +1 to hit rolls if you are below starting strength, and you also get +1 to your wound rolls if you are also battle shocked. So this isn't a bad baseline buff, just getting +1 to hit for your unit is quite nice, but when you get battle shocked, it just becomes even more powerful. A character leading, say, a unit of Hellblasters with +1 to hit and +1 to wound, when you've had a few models killed off and you are battle shocked, can make for a very scary ranged unit. It is again just annoying that it has that battle shocked caveat, which means you aren't always going to be getting both of those benefits. Next up, we have Weapons of the First Legion. This isn't quite the same as our old Weapons of the Dark Age, which was a godsend back in 9th edition. This enhancement is 15 points, and it gives a simple +1 attack, strength, and damage to the bearer's weapon, which is fairly amazing for 15 points. Putting it on a Bike Chaplain, for instance, gets you 6 strength 7, -1 AP, 3 damage swings on the charge with +1 to wound, so it can make a very scary character threat into most enemies. It then gets boosted when you are battle shocked, where you get +2 to those stats, so getting +2 to your strength, attacks, and damage. So that can actually make this unbelievably strong, and it would be incredibly good if there was a way you could proc battle shock on demand on one of your units. That would just make this enhancement an auto take, I think. It is still quite good for buffing those 3 characteristics. It's just annoying. It's almost teasing you with the improved version that you just can't rely on. And then finally for this detachment, you also get the Pennant of Remembrance, which is only 10 points. This goes on an Ancient and nets the bearer and his unit a 6-up Feel No Pain. So it's not much, but it is actually a pretty good thing to add to, say, a unit of Deathwing Knights that have an Ancient joining them. Getting them to be a 4 wound unit with -1 to incoming damage and a 6-up Feel No Pain can make them incredibly tanky. It does also get boosted when you're battle shocked, bumping the 6-up Feel No Pain to a rather insane 4-up Feel No Pain, so this can make a unit of your Deathwing Terminators or Knights mind-blowingly durable and almost impossible to get rid of. The thing I like about this one is that for 10 points, getting a 6-up Feel No Pain on a unit of like 10 Terminators or even 5 Deathwing Knights is already fairly solid. Like, that's not a terrible investment. So the battle shock caveat on this is, yes, it's a bit annoying because you can't proc it on demand, but it's not as annoying because you're only paying 10 points, and paying 10 points for that base 6-up Feel No Pain feels pretty okay to me. So the bonus getting you up to 4-up Feel No Pain is just a really nice cherry on top. So I think this is a fairly good, fairly reliable pick out of the 4. The stratagems for the Unforgiven task force also have some fairly nice picks. We do get Armour of Contempt, of course. That makes an appearance in all of the Codex detachments, netting you that ever useful -1 to incoming AP for a set of shooting or melee attacks. We're not going to dwell on it any further because it's been covered to death in a load of my other videos. But Fire Discipline is our first unique one. This is in the shooting phase. You get to pick a unit, and for that phase, they get Assault, Heavy, and ignores cover on their ranged attacks. So if you have advanced up, you can still shoot, or you will be getting +1 to hit if you stayed still. It is just a handy little bonus to some of your shooting, and it's nice that it is reactive. You can use this to balance out whatever you have done in the previous movement phase. So even if you have advanced to get onto an objective, you will know you've got this, so you can still shoot. If you stayed still, you will know that you can make your unit that much better and ignore some cover into an enemy that you might want to try and shoot off an objective. Unforgiven Fury is another fairly solid one that can be used in both the shooting or fight phase. This gives you lethal hits on your attacks, which is great for a unit that you really need to punch up into a tough enemy. You get a bonus to this. You get critical hits on a 5+ if any unit in your army is battle shocked. So obviously this won't be on the unit that you're using the stratagem on, because you can't use stratagems on battle shocked units. But if any other unit in your army is battle shocked, this can be a great strat to get a load of auto wounds onto an enemy, and something like Intercessors with their new up to 40 shots from their bolt rifles with the new rule they got in the data slate, they can get up to 13 auto wounds even into something like a knight, which in a pinch could be super helpful at bringing down that really scary target. The next strat for the detachment is Intractable. This allows you the very simple ability of being able to shoot and still charge even if you've fallen back. So this can be brilliant if your opponent is trying to tie you up or you have some mechanics that go off on the charge. You can still get out of combat, do some shooting in your shooting phase, and then just dive right back in to take advantage of any charge bonuses you may be getting. So once more, just a really useful all-rounder stratagem for 1 CP. It's always handy to have in your back pocket. Grim Retribution is up next. This one is done in your opponent's shooting phase. It allows you to pick a unit of yours that has been targeted and lost any models, and they can shoot back at the enemy that shot at them. So if a unit of Hellblasters got lit up and lost a model or two, you can absolutely return fire and just obliterate the enemy unit that shot at you and do a load of damage back into them for just 1 command point, which is a fairly good way to deter an enemy from even trying to shoot some of your stuff off of objectives, because if they only end up killing 1 or 2 models, you can actually do more damage back to them in their own shooting phase than they've done to you. The final stratagem is Unbreakable Lines, which is very strong. It used to be -1 to incoming damage, which was just bonkers. It has been toned down a bit now, but for 2 command points, this allows you in your opponent's charge phase to pick a unit which is in engagement range of the enemy unit that's charged, and that enemy is -1 to wound your unit, so just making it really difficult for the enemy to punch through your tougher roadblocks, but even turning your squishier units into fairly durable little obstacles that your opponent is going to struggle to get through. Now it is pricey at 2 command points, but on something like Deathwing Terminators or Deathwing Knights, that can make them almost impossible to shift off an objective. So there is actually quite a lot going on for the Unforgiven task force. It does have a good selection of enhancements and stratagems. It's just the actual detachment rule, which in my opinion lets it down. But never fear, because the Dark Angels do also get access to a few more detachments, and the first of these is the Inner Circle Task Force. This is your Deathwing themed army. It brings with it the Vowed Target rule, and what this does is it allows you at the start of the movement phase to pick either Defensive Footing or Aggressive Push. Defensive Footing lets you pick an objective you control, and until your next movement phase, that is your vowed objective, whilst Aggressive Push lets you pick up to all of the objective markers you don't control, and they are your vowed objectives for the turn. And what happens is that every time a Deathwing infantry unit shoots or fight, and they go into a unit which is within range of one of your vowed objectives, they get +1 to wound. So essentially, all of your Terminators and other foot Deathwing units will be getting +1 to wound when they are fighting over objectives. It's a pretty great little rule. I personally would always be picking Aggressive Push because it gets you that greater range of objectives, and I think whilst it is a shame it doesn't extend to things like your Dreadnoughts or tanks or even the Lion, which to be fair is a big miss in my opinion, it can still be good for adding a lot of damage to both your shooting and your melee output if you are running a heavy Deathwing style list. The enhancements are all Deathwing specific, and Champion of the Deathwing is up first. For 15 points, this nets you lethal hits on the bearer's melee weapons, and if the melee attack is near a vowed objective, the bearer gets critical hits on a 5+. So it's a nice little personal output buff. It's not amazing considering the weapons your Deathwing characters can generally get, but getting lethal hits on something like a relic weapon can be fairly tasty for just pushing a few extra wounds through on something like a Terminator captain. Eye of the Unseen is the cheapest at 10 points. This gives you some command point regeneration. It allows you to roll a dice, and on a 5+, you regain a command point when you use a stratagem on the bearer's unit. You do also get +1 to the roll when you are near or on a vowed objective, so fighting over that key objective can make it a bit easier to get that command point back, which is fairly handy. For 10 points, it's pretty easy to fit into your army. I would say the big downside of this is that in this detachment, you're probably bringing Azrael, and he gets you an easier, more reliable bit of CP regen anyway. Singular Will is pricier at 20 points. This allows the bearer and his unit to pile in and consolidate an extra 3 inches. So potentially getting you 6 inches to move up and around to either get more models into combat or onto an objective more easily, or just potentially tag something else in combat. Deathwing are at their core more of a melee focused army than a shooty one, so this is pretty solid, and even at 20 points I can see this getting a good bit of use on a character that is strolling around with some Deathwing Knights or Blade Guard veterans. Finally, we get Deathwing Assault. This is pricier still at 30 points, but this allows your bearer, who has to have the Deep Strike rule, to come in on the first, second, or third movement phase. So essentially letting him and his unit Deep Strike in turn 1. So you can drop onto the board, completely catch your enemy on the back foot, and unleash a load of shooting into them, or just drop a blob of knights near to a vowed objective and dare your opponent to charge you in their next turn, or just go for a risky 9-inch charge in turn 1 if you really wanted to. So it can be expensive and it won't always work out for you, but it can be absolutely game-changing if you do have a plan for it. The stratagems in this detachment are all 1 command point, which is a nice bonus. I'm not going to go into Armor of Contempt because, hey, look at that, it's still here. But Relic Teleportarium is the first new stratagem. This allows a Deathwing unit from your army coming in via Deep Strike to be set up 6 inches away from enemies rather than 9 inches. This is obviously a change from the old 3 inches that it was before the latest data slate, so it is less good than it was, but still 6 inches isn't a bad distance to be able to drop in. You of course can't charge after you use this, it does clarify that, so you can't use this to get an easy 6-inch charge, but dropping in 6 inches away can get you onto an objective or into an area of the board the enemy thought was screened off a little better, and dropping something like 10 Deathwing Terminators near a vowed objective can be unleashing a hell of a lot of Stormbolter fire into an opponent, which, with something like Oath of Moment on them, can actually do a significant bit of work into most enemy units. Martial Mastery is used in the fight phase. This lets a Deathwing infantry unit reroll wound rolls of 1 or get full rerolls to wound on your vowed objective. So being +1 to wound and getting full rerolls, that means things like your power fists will be doing a huge amount of damage into basically any target. A 5-man squad will kill most marine tanks in a single round of combat with 5 Terminators and a character, so it does make them exceptionally efficient when you are fighting over a vowed objective. The Wrath of the Lion is next. This is done in the charge phase, and it gives you a simple impact hits style stratagem. So you roll a dice for each model in your unit, adding 1 to the result if the enemy you've charged is within range of a vowed objective, and for each 4+ they take a mortal wound, up to a maximum of 3. This is kind of meh. If it was up to 6 mortals, I don't think it would be as bad, but having that 3 cap on the most mortal wounds you can do, that just doesn't really feel like it's worth a command point in my opinion, unless you've got an enemy character that is on 1 or 2 wounds left and you just want to kill him before he potentially strikes first into you. If you're charging into something with fights first like the Lion or something, you could potentially kill him off before he gets to swing. That's about the only time I can really see it being very useful. Duty unto Death is put on a Deathwing unit in the fight phase after an enemy unit has selected targets. Your unit gets a 4+ fight on death with +1 to the roll on your vowed objectives. So each Terminator or Blade Guard veteran will be getting on a 3+ to be able to fight before they get removed. So it can be quite difficult and quite punishing for your opponent to try and steal an objective, or it can just help you to take an objective from them that you're fighting over, because even if they are killing you off first, you are still killing them, so you can potentially swing the objective control in your favor. So it is fairly solid for 1 command point, especially with how effective your units can be in melee, and especially over a vowed objective. Finally, you also get Unmatched Fortitude. This is a simply brilliant defensive tool. After the enemy has chosen targets in the shooting phase, you can put this on a Deathwing infantry unit, and if the enemy shooting has higher strength than your toughness, it gets -1 to wound rolls. So making those really low volume, hard hitting attacks that are good at killing Terminators much less effective into them. And really, again, giving things like your Deathwing Knight just this unparalleled level of durability when they are holding on to an objective for you. If you instead want to go for a Ravenwing themed army, then the newly improved Company of Hunters detachment brings some rules which can really help you make the most of a mounted bike riding force. The Masters of Maneuver rule allows all Astartes units to shoot when they have advanced or fallen back, whilst your mounted units, they get to shoot and charge after they've advanced or fallen back. So making your whole army really mobile and able to keep the enemy at a distance while you're still shooting into them, or just letting your mounted units get up in the enemy's face as soon as possible and charge in. You also get a small additional bonus of Outriders becoming battle line, which can be cheeky because you can now bring a lot of them, and they are now much better than they were before with the latest data slate. I do think that despite their improvements, maybe wanting to bring more than 3 full units isn't going to happen all that often. I think that is still a good number to go for. So whether this will actually make a big difference unless you're playing a massive game, I really don't know, but it's a nice little extra thing to have if you did want to go for a pure, fully mounted army. As mentioned earlier, your mounted and flying vehicles gain that Ravenwing keyword, which does impact a few things here. And so in terms of the enhancements, these are all Ravenwing model only. The Mastercrafted weapon is our first pick at 10 points. This just brings a simple buff of precision to the bearer's weapons. It's okay, but I'll be honest, Ravenwing don't have the scariest melee output anyway, so getting something like precision on a bike chaplain or a Ravenwing champion, it really isn't all that terrifying to most well-defended characters in any case, so it's not going to make a big difference, I don't think, but it is a nice way to spend your last 10 points if you do just want to have a unit that goes character hunting. Mounted Strategist is 30 points now, and as of the latest data slate, it allows a unit to reroll their advance and charge rolls, which is a bit pricey for 30 points, but there's been a bit of a hoo-ha about this one due to GW actually making a mistake in the data slate and changing the wrong enhancement. This one, as it stands, is meant to give you those 2 rerolls, so whether that's going to change in points because of the mistake they made, I don't know. But the next enhancement, Master of Maneuver, that now currently also reads that it gives you advance and charge rerolls, and it's only 15 points. So it's literally half the price for the exact same rule. Now, what Master of Maneuver is meant to show is the old rule that it has, which essentially lets the bearer and his units be put into reserves without counting towards the total points limit you can have in strategic reserves, and it also lets you set them up on the battlefield as though it was 1 battle round higher than it actually is. So that's actually not a bad enhancement. Getting more off the board and being able to bring in from reserves can be quite advantageous to an army like a Ravenwing list, and getting them on the board that bit sooner in a better position is really quite handy. So for 15 points, I think this one is a worthy pick if you are running a lot of bikes. The final enhancement is Recon Hunter. This is 20 points and it gives the bearer and his unit the very handy Scouts 9-inch rule. So letting your fast moving units get even further up the board right at the start of the game, and on something like Black Knights with a command squad has a really good chance at getting you their turn 1 charge into pretty much any target on the battlefield, so that can be incredibly scary for your opponent. Once again, we do have 6 stratagems to support your Ravenwing lists, and again, these are all 1 command point. Hunter's Trail allows a mounted unit from your army in the command phase to pick an objective it is within range of, and you get to sticky it, so it will stay under your control even as you then ride off to go and claim other areas of the board. This is obviously very handy in a fast-moving mobile army like the Ravenwing. Death on the Wind, it lets you force a battle shock test on an enemy unit you've shot at in your shooting phase, and if there's a Ravenwing unit within 6 inches of that enemy unit, the test is at -1, so that can be quite handy at maybe denying stratagem use on them or stopping an enemy from holding an objective. Once again, like we've said earlier, battle shock isn't really something you can always rely on, so it can be a bit iffy from that perspective, but forcing a battle shock test could potentially stop your opponent from scoring or being able to use that key stratagem they needed, so it can definitely help in a pinch. Armor of Contempt is next. Still here, still the same. Moving on. The next one is High Speed Focus, which is a great defensive strat. In the enemy shooting phase, you can put this on a Ravenwing unit that has been targeted, and the enemy attacks into them are at -1 to hit. So this can make your bikers that much more difficult to take out before they get onto an objective or get a charge lined up, and it can actually combo with Armor of Contempt really quite well to make a unit that is incredibly durable against enemy shooting. Talon Strike is done in either your shooting or fight phase. This gives a mounted unit from your army +1 to wound against infantry or mounted character units, so it doesn't do anything against monsters or vehicles, but into anything being led by a character on foot or on a bike. This can help your bolters and plasma talons, or even things like your chainswords in melee, just rip through them that much more reliably. Again, as I said, Ravenwing aren't the best in terms of their damage output, so anything that can help you wound that much better is going to really benefit you. Finally, Rapid Reprisals. This lets you put a unit that isn't in engagement range into ongoing reserves. This is done at the enemy fight phase, so as long as you are not in combat, you can drive off the board, go into reserves, and then come back in your movement phase and set up your unit right where you need them on a flank of an enemy, or to get onto an objective, or even just to get away from a scary melee threat that is bearing down on you. So it is a brilliant trick to be able to pull off, and it can help you to score secondaries or just potentially pull an enemy unit out of position so they are essentially useless for a turn or two. We won't dwell on the Grotmus detachment for too long because we did do a whole video on it which I will link down below, but the Lion's Blade Task Force is a combined Deathwing and Ravenwing themed force. It lets you get a bonus to your charge rolls for your Deathwing unit if there's a Ravenwing unit within engagement range of the enemy, and it also lets you force desperate escape tests on enemies that want to fall back from your Ravenwing. I do think it's a decent detachment. It does have some tricks you can pull off to get the Deathwing into melee more reliably, and it does have some fairly good enhancements and stratagems. Getting +1 damage on a melee weapon with the Calibanite armaments for just 15 points really isn't shabby, whilst getting you some uppy downy tricks on Deathwing units thanks to the 20-point Fulgus Magna is just absolutely brilliant for your Terminator units. You also get to utilize the incredibly strong Inescapable Wrath stratagem, which lets you charge in the enemy charge phase to try and push them off an objective or just punish them for getting too close to you. Whilst the other great stratagem I think is Strength in Unity, which can combo into a devastatingly good defensive stratagem, potentially netting you -1 to be hit and -1 to be wounded if you have both a Ravenwing and a Deathwing unit in combat with an opponent. So there really are some nice tricks to play around with in this detachment, and I would say now that I've had more time to think about it and digest it, it's definitely better than the Unforgiven, and it's at the very least on a par with the others. The Inner Circle and the Company of Hunters are both really great if you are running a pure Deathwing or Ravenwing themed list, and I certainly think the Company of Hunters especially has now got a lot more teeth than it ever did before. Not only has it had some great detachment level changes, but it's also had a few key buffs to certain units like Black Knights and Outriders, which just make the whole thing perform much more effectively. On to the main units of the Dark Angels now. Their Codex has a fair few to get through, but we start off incredibly strong with the Chapter Master himself, Azrael. He's had a few point increases since the start of 10th edition, but at his current 115 points, he is still basically an auto-include. Toughness 4, 6 wounds, a 2-up save, a 4-up invuln isn't exactly bad as far as Marine HQs go, it's fairly run-of-the-mill. He does have some pretty solid output though, with a decent bit of shooting. He can get up to 3 strength 8, -3 AP, 2 damage shots within 12 inches that are also anti-infantry 4+, and have dev wounds, so we can do quite a bit of damage to enemy infantry units, and add some acceptable shooting if you put him in another unit like some Intercessors or some Hellblasters. Conversely, he can also add some melee punch to the units he joins as well. He has 6 strength 6, -4 AP, 2 damage swings that also have dev wounds thanks to the Sword of Secrets. So he is all round just a good addition no matter where you put him, and he also boosts the output of his own unit even more by granting them sustained hits thanks to the Supreme Grand Master rule. He also gives his unit a defensive buff, with a 4-up invulnerable save against shooting thanks to the Lion Helm. So he just brings a really good amount of personal output and some really good offense and defense to whatever squad you put him with. But that isn't all, because he also has a Watcher, which grants him a once per game 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. That goes to his whole squad, so if you get hit by any mortals coming in from an enemy, or your Hellblasters, if you put him with them, decided to overcharge, he can help to keep your squad alive for that one crucial turn, which can be absolutely key. And then finally, he also brings not just a unit buff, but an army bonus. He nets you an extra command point in each of your command phases with Masterful Tactician. He is just in general a really solid all-rounder HQ. He is shooty, he's choppy, he's good at buffing ranged and melee units. He brings them good offense, defense, utility. He is just almost the perfect all-rounder HQ. On top of that, he also has the Deathwing keyword, so he does bring that to the unit he joins, so that can give him even more use in something like the Inner Circle Task Force Detachment, thanks to him bringing that Deathwing buff to a unit that may otherwise not have it, like your Intercessors or Hellblasters. Next up we have Belial. He comes with a new and updated model. I am using the index cards here in the video, so bear with on the images front. The actual rules should all be correct and up to date, but the image, well, I can't change the image unfortunately, so we will just have to make do. But Belial is a mere 85 points. He brings a Terminator stat line of toughness 5, 2-up save, 4-up invuln, and a decent 6 wounds, so he is fairly tanky. He can join Deathwing Knights, Deathwing Terminators, and both the regular and assault Terminators. And in terms of his own output, he's got a slightly boosted Stormbolter, which grants him 2 strength 4, no AP, 2 damage shots, or 4 shots within 12 inches, and it does actually have precision, so he can use it to potentially snipe out characters, although with no AP it's not going to be all that reliable. In close combat he is also a pretty great anti-character tool. He's got 6 strength 6, minus 2 AP, 2 damage swings that also have precision. It's overall not a bad melee profile. I wouldn't say it is amazing. I personally would have quite liked it to have been maybe a little bit better for someone that is meant to be the best duelist in the chapter, but I mean, never mind, it is what it is. He, in terms of what he brings to his unit, he grants them the precision rule when they score a critical hit, so any 6s to hit from his unit will also be able to go into characters, so that can help the unit to potentially snipe out some enemy HQs. And he can also throw some mortal wounds back when he is personally attacked. He does a mortal wound on a 2+ up to a maximum of 6 whenever an attack is allocated to him in combat, which is fairly cute. It can deter people from trying to precision him out in melee. But I would say overall, despite only being 85 points, he just isn't all that great. He's certainly no better than a regular Terminator Captain or something like a Terminator Librarian or Chaplain, in my opinion. So although he does have a pretty cool new model, I think most of the time you will probably just be running him as a regular Terminator Captain. Someone that doesn't have a new model yet is Sammael. Although hopefully in 11th edition he will get one and he will move on from being Finecast. He's on a jet bike and he can join either Outriders or Black Knights. He's toughness 5 with 7 wounds and a 3-up save, a 4-up invuln, and a speedy 12-inch move, which is pretty solid. He does actually have some decent shooting. He's got a twin Stormbolter for 2 or 4 strength 4 shots. These are only 1 damage though compared to Belial's. But then he also has the always overcharged Plasma Cannon. Now this is only D3 shots, but it does have Blast, and then it is strength 8, minus 3 AP and 2 damage, so it can do some work into 10-man squads of Marines reasonably well. It is honestly not a terrible bit of shooting for 115 points. In melee, he has the Raven Sword, and this makes him a really quite good Marine killer. He's got 6 attacks that are strength 6, they're minus 3 AP and 2 damage, but they have sustained hits too. And what that means is that on the charge, he can on average kill about 4 Marines as he goes in. So with an accompanying unit of Black Knights or Outriders and their new melee profiles and rules, he can be pretty damn terrifying. He also gives the unit he joins the ability to advance and still shoot or charge, or if they can already do that, such as in the Company of Hunters detachment, if you bring that, he instead grants them +1 to both of those roles, so he can be a very zippy little unit that can quite easily get himself and his squad into melee turn 1 if they need to. And then he brings another nasty little trick in the rule cut off their escape. And what this does is that he can stop a non-monster or vehicle unit from falling back without taking a desperate escape test. So they have to make a desperate escape test if they want to fall back from him. And if the enemy is battle shocked, they have to subtract 1 from that roll. So potentially this can make an enemy have a 50-50 chance per model of losing models per dice roll. So it really is quite impactful, and it can make it a very, very bad idea for an enemy squad to try and fall back once Sammael has caught them in combat. Ezekiel is another HQ that is in sore need of an update. He is not even in Finecast, he is still bloody metal. I think he released when I first got into the hobby, which was back in 1996. I'm pretty sure that is when Ezekiel came out. He is amazing though, I do love him. I would love to see a redesign in the style of the new Inner Circle companions. I think that would suit his aesthetic perfectly. But for a mere 75 points, you get a toughness 4 wound model with a 2-up save and a 4-up in run. His shooting is okay. He's got a bolt pistol, which is called the Deliverer, which is essentially a 2 damage -1 AP precision bolt pistol. And then he also has some psychic shooting with Mind Wipe. This is actually not bad. Strength 6, -2 AP, D6 damage. And if you focus it, it can be anti-character 4+, dev wounds, and precision. So it can be fairly scary for sniping out enemy HQs. In melee, his Traitor's Bane is okay. It's very good against Chaos, but it's 4 attacks at strength 6, -2 AP, and D3 damage. The good part against Chaos is it is anti-Chaos 2+, so it will be wounding all that Chaos units and stuff like that on 2s, which is quite good. But even still, with just D3 damage, it can be quite swingy, and only having 4-5, as we'll see in just a sec, attacks isn't really a huge amount, so he isn't the most terrifying melee combatant. In terms of his datasheet rules, he does have a Psychic Hood to grant his unit a 4-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks, and then you do also have a niche little ability, Engulfing Fear. This allows you to force a battle shock test on an enemy unit within 18 inches in your shooting phase. So once again, not super reliable being a battle shock mechanic, but it can be a nasty trick to pull on an opponent that isn't aware that he can do that. His final bit of war gear is the Book of Salvation. This gives him and his unit +1 attack, so he does technically get 5 attacks, but the big thing about this is giving +1 attack to something like Blade Guard veterans or Inner Circle companions that he can join can be ridiculously good. It can massively boost their output. The downside of this bit of war gear is that if Ezekiel is destroyed, all of your units within 6 inches have to test Battle Shock. So he can be a bit of a detriment too, but in general, like the pros outweigh the cons. +1 attack to a unit of Blade Guard or Inner Circle companions is a massive boost on them. Everyone's favourite chaplain Asmodai is next up, again with a brand new, lovely looking model, I have to say. Asmodai has changed quite significantly from the index, and with his new model, he is 70 points. He's still the same toughness 4, 4 wounds with a 3-up save and a 4-up in run, but he now comes with a combined weapon profile of his Crozius and his power weapon, and they have a strike and a sweep profile. He can either throw 5 strength 6 -2 AP 2 damage attacks or 8 strength 5 -2 AP 1 damage attacks into the enemy. And on top of that, he and his unit can reroll hit rolls in melee thanks to Exemplar of Hate. So he can do a good bit of output and he can bring a lot of buffs to the squad. He also forces a battle shock test on enemy units with characters in at the start of the fight phase, which is done at -1. So he can debuff an enemy from using strats in a critical combat, which is fairly nice. But if you put him with something like Assault Intercessors, they can actually be really good because they'll be getting reroll hits from Asmodai, and their own datasheet rule, Shock Assault, can get them a full rerolls to wound as well. So they can get some really accurate, really hard hitting attacks into the enemy target when Asmodai is with them. His final trick is some CP regeneration. He gets a CP back if he kills an enemy character in melee. So he's okay. He does bring a nice melee buff to a unit. The big problem, I guess, is that you can replicate that with Oath of Moment. But also he does have the Deathwing keyword, so adding that potentially offensive buff if you bring him in the Inner Circle detachment, joining him to a unit of Assault Intercessors can get them a lot of attacks that are re-rolling hit rolls and getting +1 to wound in the Inner Circle and re-rolling wound rolls, so they can be quite a cheap but effective little unit with that combo. The Dark Angels also have their relatively new character, the lovely Lazarus. He was revealed a few Christmases ago, I want to say 3 or 4 Christmases ago, maybe. But he's 70 points. He gets you the similar as ever toughness 4 stat line with 5 wounds, 3 up save, and a 4 up invuln. His melee comes in the form of Enmity's Edge, which is kind of like Ezekiel's, but anti-Psyker instead of anti-Chaos. It has 6 attacks, and they are strength 6, -3 AP and 2 damage. So overall, it is just a bit better than Ezekiel's. And I would say Anti-Psyker is more generally useful than Anti-Chaos unless you go up against Chaos a lot. Anti-Psyker means into a lot of armies that can be devastatingly good. Tyranids, Eldari, Thousand Suns, all of those sort of things will let Lazarus put in a lot of work. The Spirit Shield Helm grants him and him alone, important to note that, a 3-up Feel No Pain against Psychic and Mortal Wounds, so this doesn't go to his unit. And he also has Intractable Will, which is a fight on death mechanic. Unfortunately, unlike Khan, like we saw the other week, this isn't automatic. You do have to roll for it, and it only goes off on a 4+. So if he dies and he hasn't fought yet, you can roll a dice on a 4+, he gets to fight before he dies. It's not super reliable, but can let him do some work into an enemy that charges and kills him off. And if that enemy is a Psyker, then they could potentially take a lot of damage as Lazarus goes down swinging. What I'd quite like to have seen with this, even though it isn't like super amazing, it would have just been quite fluffy, would be if Intractable Will went off on a 4+, but against Psykers it automatically went off or something. I think that would just make it a little bit better, a little bit more reliable and just happen a bit more. Although we did sadly lose the Deathwing command squad with the Codex, the Ravenwing command squad does remain. These guys are a unit of 3 and they cost you 120 points. They are like a character in that they can join units, so the 3 of them can join your Outriders or your Black Knights, and combined they bring you a toughness 5 profile with a 12-inch move. There's 12 wounds in total, and they have a 3-up save backed up by a 5-up invuln. So they aren't exactly flimsy. They also get 3 rules specific to each of the models in the unit, so 1 for the Apothecary, 1 for the Champion, 1 for the Ancient. The Narthasium lets you return a destroyed model, not an ATV, but just a destroyed model in your command phase. So if you have these 3 and a unit of, say, 6 Black Knights, you can be getting back a Black Knight in each of your command phases. The Ancient carries the Astartes banner, which grants you +1 to the OC of models in the unit. And then the Champion gives you +1 to advance and charge rolls and the ability to heroically intervene for 0 CP, which is a very good set of buffs. In the Company of Hunters detachment, that can be getting you advance and charge with +1 to both of those rolls. Not to mention, the Champion is a character, so he can take an enhancement. So potentially that could be in the Company of Hunters detachment, getting you the reroll of your advance and charge rolls as well. So they can make a super reliable turn 1 charge. They each come with Plasma Talons for some okay plasma output. 3 strength 7, -2 AP, 1 damage shots within 9 inches that can be bumped up to strength 8, -3 AP and 2 damage if you overcharge. So it really isn't too shabby as far as shooting goes. And then in melee, they come with a Black Knight combat weapon. This is 3 attacks each at strength 5, -2 AP, 1 damage, and as of the latest update in the app, do have the devastating wounds. In the battle data slate, they didn't have it, even though Black Knights did, and it's the exact same weapon, but the app has been updated. They do get dev wounds on these, so that is nice. The Champion instead gets a mastercrafted power sword, which is 6 strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage swings. So all in all, not amazing, but not awful. They do, however, really come into their own when you join them to something like 6 Black Knights or 6 Outriders. And as we will see in just a bit with the Black Knights, that can do quite a lot to their overall damage output. The final named character in the Codex is of course the Primarch himself. Lionel Johnson has returned to 40k, and he's recently got a price bump back up to his old cost of 315 points, so he is very expensive, but he can be really deadly too. He has an 8-inch move, toughness 9, 10 wounds, a 2-up save, a 3-up invuln, which is fantastic. He is also lone operative if he's within 3 inches of a friendly infantry unit, so he can be very well protected from that perspective. He can also deep strike if you want to put him in reserve and then drop him onto the board behind some terrain or something like that. And he also has the ability to reflect mortal wounds onto the enemy with the Emperor's Shield. So if your opponent does try to kill him with a load of weight of dice style attacks, he can do a lot of damage back into those units. In terms of his own personal output, he does have the Armor Luminous for a nice bit of pistol fire. This is either 4 strength 4, -1 AP, 2 damage shots, or probably better most of the time I would say, 2 shots from the Plasma Barrel, which is strength 8, -3 AP and 2 damage. So they're both okay, and I mean there may be some situations where the 4 strength 4 shots might serve you better, but melee is of course where he really does shine, and fealty is back to its former glory with either 8 strength 12, -4 AP, 4 damage swings and lethal hits, or 16 strength 6, -3 AP, 2 damage swings with sustained hits. He will on average do about 20 wounds to a Oath of Moment Imperial Knight in the strike profile, or kill an entire 10-man squad by himself with the sweep profile, so he is just utterly brutal in combat. And he also on top of that brings a few, they're okay, they're not amazing, but a few okay buffs with his Primarch of the First Legion rule, which lets you pick one of 3 buffs. You can either go for All Secrets Revealed, which grants you a CP when the enemy uses a stratagem on a unit within 12 inches of him, but then also forces them to take a battle shock test, and if they fail, the strat doesn't go off, so it can generate you a CP and also deny the enemy getting the benefits of the strat while still spending theirs. So that can be really nice for denying a crucial strat near to him. Martial Exemplar gives Astartes units within 6 inches of him +1 to hit in melee, so making all your things like Blade Guard or Terminator units just much more deadly. Or instead you can go for No Hiding from the Watchers. This is more of a defensive buff. All Astartes units within 6 inches of him get a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. This is probably the best all-rounder because it's amazing on him because he's got no other defense against mortals, so that is a great way for your opponent to try and deal with him. So this gives him a great defense against that, but also just having it on your units around you, especially if your opponent does have a lot of mortal wound output, it is going to be a really big force multiplier for keeping your stuff alive. And things like Terminators or Blade Guard, which are quite tanky with the exception of mortal wounds, will absolutely love this buff to keep them going. All round he is great. Don't get me wrong, he is pricey and I don't think he is maybe as good as Guilliman, but he is pretty good. I would prefer, I've said this before, I would prefer if he was maybe a little bit pricier, maybe 325 points, but then got the old ability he had for -1 to be wounded from the Emperor's Shield. I think that would make him really worth his cost. He would be super difficult to put down and just be a really scary threat that your opponent needed to deal with. He's definitely still usable at the moment, especially now that the sweep profile of fealty is back to 2 damage. I just think he maybe isn't quite there yet in terms of being perfect for his cost. So that is the long list of Dark Angel characters. Now we are on to their main units. And of course, where better to start than with the Deathwing of the First Company. The Deathwing Terminators are 36 points per model, and they are pretty much the same as regular Marine Terminators now. You can no longer mix and match melee and ranged options like Thunderhammer Storm Shields and Cyclone Missile Launchers and that kind of thing, which is a genuine shame. You can still get the option to take a plasma cannon if you want, but to be honest, you probably never will. The main changes to them is their Deathwing rule, which lets them ignore any modifiers to ballistic or weapon skill and grants them +1 to hit against your Oath of Moment target. So you will now have Stormbolters and Power Fists hitting on 2s, which can make them really quite scary. They do also get access to a Watcher, which grants them a once per battle 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. So if you don't have the Lion around or is using one of his different buffs, that can get you a nice extra line of defense against what is one of the best way to deal with Terminators and their 2-up armor save, 4-up invuln, which is mortal wounds. They aren't bad overall, they basically just do as well as any other Terminator does. So if Terminators are doing well in the meta, then these guys will do well. If Terminators are doing badly in the meta, then these guys will do badly. But they can be okay, and in the Inner Circle task force, they can actually punch up quite well thanks to the +1 to wound on vowed objectives. Deathwing Knights instead, these are your pure anvil. Now, they can still hit hard after a few recent changes, but generally they are just a flat out objective holding anvil. They are quite pricey. 5 of them does cost you 250 points, so they are 50 points per model, but what that gets you is a toughness 5 body with 4 wounds, a 2-up armor save, 4-up invuln, and the Inner Circle rule, meaning they reduce incoming damage by 1. So it will take 4 2-damage attacks to kill one off, and even something like the Lion going into them with fealty will now not be killing a single knight per swing, because it will be dropping his strike profile down from 4 damage to 3, so it is a very, very strong defensive tool. They also get the Watcher for the 4-up Feel No Pain once per game, so even mortal wounds can feel like they are hitting a brick wall into these guys when you pop that. They are, as I said, just a unit you will drop down onto an objective and dare the enemy to try and get rid of them. However, in a nice addition to being such a good anvil unit, they can actually hit quite hard in return. They each come with a Mace of Absolution, which grants them 4 Strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage swings with Anti-Monster and Anti-Vehicle 4+, and they can each swap that for a Power Weapon, which grants them 5 attacks instead of 4 of the same Strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage. And the Master, who is their squad leader, he has a Great Weapon of the Unforgiven, which is 5 attacks at Strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage with Dev Wounds and Sustained Hits 1. He can instead swap his for a Relic Weapon, and that gets him 6 Strength 7, -2 AP, 2 damage swings with lethal hits. So they are really quite punishing. Oh, these all hit on 2s, by the way, as well. So they are very accurate, and they can really punish an enemy that is trying to get rid of them. Even just a unit of 5 with power weapons and the relic weapon can pretty much kill an entire 10-man marine squad by themselves, so it does take a lot to dislodge them, and if any of them do survive the opponent's attacks to try and get rid of them, they do hit back hard. So they are basically an auto-include for me. At least 2 units in every game just gives you 2 really strong, durable, reliable midfield units. The other new Dark Angels unit is the infamous Inner Circle Companions. Like the Knights, these guys came out to a fairly underwhelming and weak rule set, but they have had quite a boost recently, and now they are another very, very impressive unit to put on the table. For a reasonably cheap 30 points each, either in a unit of 3 or 6, so 90 points or 180 points, you get a toughness 4 3 wound profile with a 3-up save. They don't have an invuln, which does sting, but of course you can remedy that by joining a Librarian or Azrael to them to help them get a nice 4-up invuln, even if it is only against shooting with Azrael, but that can still help them as they get up the board. They do also get some really nice buffs when they have characters with them, so Braziers of Judgment makes them -1 to be hit at both ranged and melee when they have a character with them, so giving them that extra layer of durability to help with their 3-up armor save. And then Enmity for the Unworthy, that gives them +1 to hit if they target a character unit, so putting their Calibanite Greatswords essentially down to 2s to hit, which is fantastic because the Greatswords are very, very, very good. Both the strike and sweep profiles are incredible at what they do. They grant you either 4 Strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage swings with lethal hits, or in the sweep profile, 5 Strength 6, -2 AP, 1 damage swings with sustained hits 2. And what that means is that you can easily chop through Marines or huge hordes of Gaunts or Orc boys. In the sustained profile, in the sweep profile, they can get up to 35 hits from a unit of 6 into a blob of Orc boys, which is led by a character, and that then translates to about 23 unsaved wounds. So they can pretty much just charge in and decimate an entire unit of boys an entire full unit of boys in one round of combat, which is just brilliant. Moving on to the Ravenwing, the Black Knights are the elite of the second company. They don't have new models yet, but hopefully they will, but they did get a nice rules update in the latest data slate. They're also 30 points per model, so 90 points for 3 or 180 for 6. They net you a toughness 5, 3 wound, 3 up save profile with a 5 up invuln as well, and the usual biker 12-inch move, so that's fairly good. As I mentioned earlier, joining a command squad to them is a pretty brilliant idea, but equally so is joining Sammael or even a chaplain on a bike to them, because they do bring some quite nice buffs to any characters that join them. They get the same plasma talons as the command squad to help thin out an enemy unit with some plasma fire before they charge in, and then they've got their Black Knight combat weapons, so each has 3 strength 5, -2 AP, 1 damage attacks, which have devastating wounds. But their datasheet ability is the Knights of Caliban rule, and that grants them on the charge anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+, so those dev wounds are now proccing on 4s. It is only 1 damage, but that still means a unit of 6 can do around 8 mortal wounds to any monster or vehicle, and with a command squad with them, that can add up with their combat weapons quite significantly, not to mention the champion's power weapon. Even though the champion's power weapon won't get the dev wounds because that is on the combat weapon itself, they do still get the anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+, so they can do a huge chunk to most big scary monsters or tanks in the game right now. They're pretty durable, they're really quick, they're very, very quick in fact. They can easily get a turn 1 charge in the company of Hunter's Detachment. They are reasonably shooty, and they have some fairly scary melee when they get the charge off, so they are just overall a very, very good option if you are running a Ravenwing list or you want a unit or 2 of Ravenwing in your army. So those are sort of the main Dark Angel units. There are a few more unique options. They do get 2 variants of speeders and 2 flyers. The Darkshroud is quite good, 115 points, and it doesn't have any amazing shooting. You either get a heavy bolter or an assault cannon, but it's relatively durable, toughness 8, 10 wounds, 3 up save and a 5 up invuln. The main reason you bring this though is the icon of Old Caliban, and this gives you a 6-inch aura around the speeder, which gives your units stealth and the benefit of cover, so -1 to be hit, and also negating a pip of enemy AP, which can have a huge impact on your units if you are going second or as you are moving them up the board. It really can be worth its weight in gold just to bring that extra layer of defense to a pretty big chunk of your army that may end up being exposed and out in the open as you're moving into position. The Vengeance, on the other hand, still absolute trash. 120 points for the same profile, but now has some shooting in addition to the heavy bolter or assault cannon. It brings the Plasma Storm Battery, which is quite frankly awful. D6 +1 shots at strength 8, -2 AP, 1 damage and twin linked, or you can overcharge it for strength 9, -3 AP and 2 damage. For a vehicle weapon, for such a big, imposing looking vehicle weapon, it's just awful. You do potentially get to shoot in the opponent's turn with Storm of Vengeance if a friendly unit is destroyed within 6 inches of the Vengeance, but in spite of all that, it really is just a rubbish amount of shooting on a way too costly platform with a rule that really won't make much of a difference a good 90% of the time. Just pretend this thing doesn't exist, bring a Storm Speeder, or if you really like the model, bring it as a Darkshroud instead. On the flyer front, they are both of course guilty of being flyers, so they are both way too expensive to bring at the moment, but on the flip side, they do both look pretty cool. The Nephilim is an anti-flyer fighter with a twin heavy bolter and black sword missiles, which are 2 strength 8, -2 AP, D6 damage shots with anti-fly 2+, so that would actually be okay if anyone else ever bought flyers. It then does also have a choice of either some anti-infantry shots with 10 strength 5, -1 AP, 2 damage mega bolter shots, or 2 strength 12, -3 AP, D6 +1 damage shots from its las cannon. It does also get the usual defense of -1 to be hit from ranged attacks, but then it also gets a little bit more defense. It is -1 to be wounded if your opponent's unit that is targeting it is a fly model, so it can be a bit more defensive against enemy flyers and that sort of thing. But for 195 points, it's just too expensive. It just really doesn't have a place in the game at the moment. The Dark Talon is pricier still at 210 points. Like the Nephilim, this is toughness 8, 11 wounds, and has a 3-up save with a 5-up invuln. It does have some token Hurricane Bolter fire, can get up to 12 bolter shots within 12 inches, which could do some work against light enemies, and it's actually got 2 Hurricane Bolters, so up to 24 shots in 12 inches. But the Rift Cannon is the main draw. This nets you D3 plus 1 shots with Blast at strength 16, minus 4 AP, 3 damage, and devastating wounds, which is quite a scary profile. The problem is, it's again just too pricey for that alone. You do get a cheeky bomb ability with the Stasis Bomb. You drop this on a unit, you can do it once per turn, and they take D3 mortal wounds, and then you roll a dice on a 1 to 3, they can't advance or fall back, and on a 4 to 6, they have to stay stationary in their next movement phase, which as far as debuffs go is actually a fairly good one. I do quite like that ability. It is just too pricey for what it brings. 210 points is too pricey for that amount of damage output, which is a shame because they are great models and it's just the state of 10th. Just flyers are priced too expensive at the moment, so you will very, very rarely see either of these. But the Dark Talon, at a little bit cheaper in terms of what it can actually do, does actually have some potential. It's just too pricey at the moment. And that is it for the Dark Angels. Apologies if it sounds like I've lost my voice. That was nearly 10,000 words just there, but you know, I do love the Dark Angels, so I don't mind doing it. I really love all of their detachments, apart from maybe the Unforgiven, but even that has a few nice things about it. I just think their models, their kits, their design aesthetic are all amazing. The army itself, I think it's nearly there with finding its feet. There could be maybe a few small adjustments. I think things like the Lion could maybe get a few little changes. I think Black Knights could do with a tiny bit more oomph as well in terms of their output. And I do wish that they would bring back the mix and match options for the Deathwing Terminators, although they're never going to, I know that. Ezekiel could do with a new model. Sammael could do with a new model. Asmodai, he's okay, but he's probably the weakest of our named characters apart from maybe Lazarus. But in general, they are doing pretty well at the moment. The army as a whole has got a lot going for it. So I think with a few more small adjustments, they can be in a very, very good spot as we go on through 10th edition. But as always, I'd love to know what you make of the Dark Angels and what changes you would make, if you would make any at all, to make the Codex feel and play better. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.